Beatrice, thank you for joining us. It's really great to talk to you. You're far away, you're in Argentina, I'm in London, and I guess this is the way we have to do things these days. I just want to, first of all, just mention that, so I have your book, and the amazing thing about this book is that when you see the cover, you think, especially because it's Phaidon, you think it's going to be this kind of architectural coffee table book. And then you open it up and it's almost a political manifesto or you know, I have to say you're very courageous. I think you go head on with a lot of issues, and I don't want to kind of spoil it and mention too many things, but there are some things that you do in this book which I think a lot of journalists are afraid to do, which is to you know, attack the holy shrines of design and and other political issues. And I think it's absolutely brilliant. I'm so grateful that such a book exists. You know, as a student starting as an architecture student, I remember that I realized how big the profession is. It just kind of, as you sink into it, it kind of grows and grows and grows. And you become sort of evangelical about things, and you want to change the world, you want to make the world better. And then you get into the profession, you realize actually there's a lot of business in the profession that needs to be done, which makes it sometimes, it gets in the way of design, it gets in the way of the big ideas. We try to sneak things in as, you know, secret agendas that we try to get in. You know, for me, that was always the secret agenda of creating human experience above all. You know, my thesis was on that topic, because I realized that in architecture school, they didn't really teach you about the human experience and how to design for it, really. And I was talking about immateriality and the idea of how sound affects your sense of space. And, you know, I studied, for my thesis, I studied mosques and cathedrals and the Barcelona Pavilion and things like that, which for me were emblematic of that kind of experience. And that was a long time ago. And yet today, we're talking about the kind of, you know, erasing of the real experience with things like the metaverse, you know, and we're all slowly disappearing into this kind of virtual existence, even before the metaverse. So as a gradual preparation for our physical bodies disappearing into a kind of avatar state and becoming part of this world, which I think is really quite scary, actually, in a lot of ways. And I think that your book is a really great departure from what we typically understand to be architecture, and really polemicize and make the statement that architecture has a political essence ultimately, and a social essence, which we cannot avoid and we should not avoid. And the idea of changing the world can start with us. So that's, I guess, by way of introduction, to say congratulations on producing such a great piece. And I hope that we hear lots more from you on that in that vein of thinking. So, you know, over to you. I mean, I wanted to understand what is behind the world around. I was in New York when the last one happened, and I was quite, in a way, perplexed, because I was expecting a bit the typical architecture conference, and it's all about design, and it's very, you know, sleek and beautiful, and yet there were things that were about growing architecture and sort of working in neighborhoods with people, and it's all very grassroots and a bit hippie in a way. I mean, I have to say it was a bit hippie, right? And for me, it was just like, hold on, it was quite challenging for me, because that's not, maybe I've got an inner hippie. There is a hippie in me somewhere, but, you know, it was challenging for me, and I went away thinking, this is actually the right thing. This is what we should be doing. So just want to open up that conversation for you to talk about the world around and what is in the world around for you.
Yeah, I mean, both your observations are so welcome, and in a way, as a I started as a writer and as a curator, and now I'm a curator, but always within me was this hope to amplify and share the work that I believe to be on the forefront, and the people and the practices that I think we should be following, and that we should be, I guess I use this metaphor sometimes of like, who are the kind of lighthouses who are going to stop the profession crashing into the rocks. How do we avoid the climate catastrophe, or how do we help as a profession, as a design in kind of community? How do we avoid those tropes and those pitfalls that have come before us? And how do we not just rewrite history over and over again? And to me, amplifying and sharing and championing is something that has is kind of underrated a little bit, I think. And we kind of intuitively expect there to be good design around us, and it just kind of appears that there are star architects, and it just appears that there are people that get invited to competitions, and it just so happens that people build museums. And actually the discourse is something that we can shape and change, and it reflects our values. And those people that get put forward and celebrated it's a consensus that we create as a community, that I think for many, many years has not been challenged. And there's just this sort of ivory tower, or whatever you like, that has just not really been confronted. Like, why do we think this is better than that? Why do we celebrate this person's career but not this person's career? They're just as interesting, they're just as profound, they've had just as much impact, but that this person's career happened in Bangladesh, or this person's career happened in a continent that we don't, so-called, there's no photography there, or there's not enough articles written about it, or people haven't gone to see it, whereas they've all been to London. And they've all seen the work of Norman Foster, and therefore Richard Rogers. It's all in the Western capital cities, and that's where the journalists are, and that's where the magazines are, and that's where things get published, and that's where the photography is, and that's where the newspapers are. And it's all compounded essentially for the last 150 years. And it's a huge problem, and it's something, we're all complicit in just accepting our landscape, our design landscape, our architectural landscape. And actually, we can change it, and we can say, actually, I really value architecture that takes nothing from the ground, that has zero impact on the world and only is positive. That's my number one value for architecture. And in a way, the Pritzker Prize this year, going to L'Aqueton Vassal, the Parisian studio, they only do like recycled, they try to only use recycled materials or recycled projects. Those things, those values, they are shifting. And I feel like the center of gravity for the conversation is changing to like, what else is happening? Why is architecture only taught? My architecture education was just, I only learned about men. I only learned about architecture through the voice of men, wealthy men. I learned about architecture through wealthy men building expensive properties for wealthy families. And that was what is presented as good and best and like aspirational and a goal. And I didn't see myself reflected in that. And I didn't see other ways of living and other value systems reflected in what was presented to me as good and quality and aspirational and a goal of life, And so I do feel that what you're saying about my work as a curator is really meaningful to me, because with the world around, with my books, with my writing, I try to present other value systems. Like, what if we celebrated this kind of more hippie, what if we celebrated a community project that says, we can have grandmothers teaching children how to cook, and that is an architectural space, and that is a project that's led by architects and led by the community. What if that was like one of the best things of the year? You know, what if that was like celebrated just as much as a expensive museum in a capital city of a Western capital city? And so just to kind of provide a foil, and not, and I love architecture, and I always say this, like, I'm like Peter Zumthor's #1 fan. I have like voice messages from Peter Zumthor that is like, I would frame it on the wall if I could. I love him. I love his work. I'm super moved, you know, by that type of architecture. Really, truly I am. But I also want to provide alternatives, and that's just not the only thing. It's not the only story, you know. And so that's why I like to have these kind of really like multiple, you know, when I do conferences or when I do shows, I always invite like tons of people, like tons, like 20, 50, 100, whatever, you know, tons, because I really find interesting and important this plurality, and putting forward women, putting forward people who organize dinners as a form of architecture, people who will campaign for policy change, because that is the thing that's going to make the big difference. To people who campaign to have, you know, different types of salmon on sale, you know, that I find that all as interesting, and I don't prioritize it above or below the other types of practice that we have traditionally followed and learned from. So yeah, that's sort of that's why it's very gratifying and important to know that it is being understood as like, you know, maybe there are other things that we can accept and say are great too, you know.
That's fantastic. I mean, I think part of the problem, because you touch on a lot of things, I think part of the problem with what gets celebrated has a lot to do with our form of media, which, well, because it's media, because it's pictures in a magazine or it's pictures on a screen, and the best experiences cannot be photographed, I think. You know, if you take a picture of a street market, you take a picture of the Ramblas in Barcelona, the best thing about it is the sound of the birds and the smell of the flowers as you're, you know, walking up to the top, and that transition, you know, then the books and so on. And that sort of real life experience that keeps getting eroded by media is, I think, part of the problem. And hence we're photographing all the stuff that we celebrate and that get media coverage, and yet the stuff that's done in the neighborhood is maybe not that photogenic, but if you were there, you'd appreciate it. I mean, I think that's in general one of the problems with media, and I'm not sure how we could ever get around that. But you know, when it comes to experience, and you mentioned Peter Zumthor, you know, again, an architecture that is better experienced in life than photographed, although it is very photogenic. It happens to have both, you know. Same with a lot of other masterpieces by men or by women, like Zaha. You know, I mean, that's another topic about, you know, the issue of men and women in the profession, which and people of different cultures and so on. I mean, I think it is generally a problem in our world. And yes, we were probably very centered on certain ideas about who is the architect, you know, the master builder, right? It came from being somebody who knew how to put bricks on top of each other, right? It was a very kind of masculine profession, and we've gone beyond that, I think, in a lot of ways. And men have had to learn to recognize that they're not alone in the world. You know, there's Adam and there's Eve, you know, by the way. Without Eve, there wouldn't be anything else. So let's remember that. So, you know, and I think that's something very beautiful. And in a way, it's very disruptive what's happening in our times, but I think it's also very beautiful because we are opening up to bigger and more important realities around us. But, you know, on the subject of the kind of West and the centeredness of, you know, London, the capital, and this, the capital, I mean, I think we have a lot of problems in our own house. You know, we talk about fixing problems in the rest of the world, when I think we have a lot of problems, you know, when it comes to societal problems and so on. And, you know, one of, in your book, actually, there's a reference to Kin.
Donna Haraway.
Yes. And she refers to kin, this idea of the familial connections that we have, that we could extend that to the planet, to the animals, and so on. And when I read that, I thought, actually, isn't that the problem, that we don't have a sense of family anymore? I think that's being eroded. There's certain things happening in our society that are having a much bigger effect, on the way we live and the way that we're affecting the planet. And so, while we're racing ahead into the future and into the metaverse, I mean, God forbid, I hope that never happens, but at least I hope that, people are aware enough to not buy into that and give up all their sense of life to an abstract entity that is, populated by avatars of themselves, and they can dress up like some children's fantasy. I mean, it's the most ridiculous thing, but I think people will be sucked into that, unfortunately. And it's that sense of reality, really. And I'm just wondering how we get back to that. Can the media turn a corner and actually promote things that are real experiences by, the fact that you create an event, a real experience is very important, because it means people are together in the same space and they will talk and they will share ideas. Then they will go back to their own places in the world and they'll carry something back with them. I mean, this is incredible. It's what we need more than anything. But I just wonder if what more can we be doing? And maybe you don't have an answer right now, but just to pose the question.
There's so many things that I've learned from Donna Haraway. She made this beautiful film. The film is what I put in the book, because she's kind of heavy going to read, but the film itself that she made with a Brazilian filmmaker is so accessible. And she talks about kinship between interspecies kinship, which and the film starts and there's a story about a crow befriending a kitten, and about this kind of collaboration between different species, and the role that humans have always had with other species is dominating other species and possessing and sort of domesticating other species. And the role of animals in the production of our world is something very subjugated and unequal. And I think that when you start to think about the world, as she often does, like from different perspectives, like from the perspective of non-human animals, your worldview changes a lot. And I think one of the other things that I've been looking at recently, and what we've touched on a lot with the world around, is that these type of ideas have been present in indigenous communities for centuries. And many, and if not most, indigenous communities don't seek to own or possess land or animals or other species, and there's a lot more cooperation. And so one of the things that a lot of people say that we could really improve upon is to think about, not about a lot of discussion, how do you decolonize the design industry, or how do you decolonize your mind, or how do you decolonize the internet, which is a whole world of very ambitious and kind of academic thinking, very progressive and important work. But also there's another view, which is that maybe we can also think about how to re-indigenize. How do we think about how to bring back some of the knowledge from indigenous communities into our day-to-day lives? And in many cases, probably at the conference that you saw in New York, there are absolutely direct applicable strategies that have been used to solve sort of problems with flooding, with fires, that have been present in indigenous communities for years and years. And so there's a lot of that, like, again, just how do you make space for other voices in the conversation that represent quite challenging positions in relation to our perspective about the world. But gradually we'll have to kind of come to terms with that. This is probably a lot better, like a lot better for everybody, if we start to think about re-indigenizing and being way more in contact with these basic things, the systems that sustain us. And we talk about infrastructure as if it's trains and boats and shipping, but also there's infrastructure of air, there's infrastructure of water, there's, you know, there's all of these other infrastructures that kind of exist around us. That, and you're going to say I'm a hippie, and I'm not a hippie, but like, you know, that is the kind of,
okay, there's nothing wrong with being a hippie. You know, it's
I think, you know, and it's something, it's really something that I think is sort of profoundly important when you think about the climate crisis. How do you solve this without radically changing your mind? Because all of the ways of thinking that we have are like, how do I get this? How can I make my life easier? How can I make my world simpler? And with the metaverse, it's like, how do I get the most done with the least possible effort on my part? And it's like, okay, I don't want to move, but I want to have a meeting. Put my headset on and I'm in the meeting, and I don't have to go anywhere because that would be so arduous. And like, so many of these technologies make, you know, so much, like, I don't know, for me, it's like, it's just an enormous amount of effort to streamline like one tiny thing for one tiny percentage of a population, so it's like their life is like a tiny bit easier. Yeah. But then the consequence, like, there's not even a big problem. Like, what's the problem? Go to a meeting, go like get on a train, go to a meeting. What's the problem? But there's like this whole kind of, you know, like enormous amounts of infrastructure that's really needed, of like people and places, and, you know, it's all happening elsewhere. Like the metaverse is run by like mining for precious minerals, it's run by server farms, it's run by, you know, AI, which needs to be trained by real people. There is no version of the internet that is like hands-free, cloud, no impact whatsoever, right? I mean, that's something that, you know, Google search has a carbon footprint. Our phones have carbon footprints, our Zoom calls have carbon footprints, our PDFs have carbon footprints, you know, and that is also something that I think we need to sort of come to like a little bit more, kind of come to terms with that a little bit more.